They assumed they were just detaining another guy who matched the description. But when he walked into court the next day, not in shackles, but wearing a tailored suit, they realized they had just made the biggest error of their careers. The call came through dispatch a little after 9:00 a.m. Black male, mid-30s, navy jacket, suspected of breaking into a car on Madison Avenue. Officers Brent Halcroft and Lynn Mercer were already patrolling nearby, sipping their morning coffee, barely paying attention. Brent pointed with his chin. "There he is," he muttered, nodding toward a man standing outside Grange Bakehouse, one of the busiest coffee spots in downtown Boise. The man looked relaxed, focused on his phone, a quass bag in one hand. He vaguely resembled the description. That was all they needed. Brent pulled up quickly, no lights, no sirens. Lynn was out before the cruiser fully stopped. "Hey, hands where I can see them," she shouted. The man, Kenton Myro, looked up, surprised but calm. "Pardon? You fit the description of a suspect. Don't move," Brent added, his hand inching toward his holster. "I'm standing outside a cafe," Kenton said, confused. "Waiting for my driver." Lynn rolled her eyes. "We'll clear it up at the station." Before Kenton could respond, Brent grabbed his arm, spinning him around. Resisting now, he said loudly, "Enough for passers by to hear." Phones started recording. Kenton didn't struggle. He stayed quiet, looking down as the cuffs snapped shut. Lynn smirked. "They all talk tough till the cuffs go on. Bet it's another guy with a fake resume and some made-up story," Brent joked. They didn't read him his rights, didn't ask for ID, didn't check the bag with a visible receipt. They shoved him in the back seat and drove off, already laughing about the paperwork they'd fake later. In the cruiser, Kenton stared ahead. "Got something to say?" Brent asked. Kenton replied calmly, "I'd like my phone call." Brent made a face. "You'll get one after booking." But something in Kenton's tone, collected, unshaken, almost bore, rattled them. Not enough to stop, but enough for Brent to glance at the rearview mirror. Kenton didn't look afraid. He didn't look unsure. He wasn't done. Booking was slow. Rob Tesh, the desk officer, blinked twice when Kenton walked in. "You guys sure about this one?" he asked. "Fits the report," Brent said, suspicious near the scene. He was outside a bakery, Kenton said quietly, holding a pastry bag and a phone. "You questioning a street call, Tesh," Lynn cut in. Rob frowned, unsure. Still, he entered Kenton's details. When the profile popped up, he did a double take. "This address." "I'd like my call now," Kenton repeated. Brent raised an eyebrow. "Who you calling? Your law school buddy?" "No," Kenton said evenly. "The Attorney General's office." Brent burst out laughing. "Sure, tell him we said hi." They walked off, but Rob didn't laugh. He was still staring at the screen, and that's when things began to change. Though Brent and Lynn had no idea how far over their heads they already were, the holding cell was chilly, not freezing, but the kind of slow chill that creeps into cuffed wrists. Kenton sat on the bench, not slouched, not rigid, just steady. His clothes were neat, boots polished, jacket pressed. He radiated calm. Meanwhile, Brent leaned against a vending machine, popping open a soda like it was any other day. "You see that guy's face," he said to Lynn, "like he was too good for this." Lynn sipped her coffee. "They all think that. Show up in nice neighborhoods, act like the rules don't count. Best part is when they start throwing around talk about lawsuits and badges." Brent laughed, like that's new. Neither noticed the man from Internal Affairs walking past the reception desk, or the fact that Rob Tesh had stepped away, into a private office, speaking on a secure line, back in the holding block. Kenton finally got his phone call. He didn't hesitate, didn't scroll through contacts. He dialed directly. "This is Morrow," he said when someone answered. "Boys PD, Madison Avenue incident. I'll need full documentation this afternoon. Then he ended the call, calmly, cleanly, no raised voice, no emotion. It lasted under 30 seconds, but it was all he needed. Later that day, the precinct chief received a quiet, concise email from the State Department of Civil Oversight. It was a flagged directive, immediate release of detainee Kenton L. Morrow. Attached were his credentials, federal database records, and notice of an active audit under Article 14 of the State Law Enforcement Integrity Act. This wasn't from a personal attorney. It came from the Attorney General's liaison. 45 minutes later, Kenton walked out of the station. Brent spotted him in the hallway, not cuffed, not escorted, but walking calmly beside two officials in dark suits. Brent blinked as if the light had shifted. "That's not possible," he muttered. Lynn narrowed her gaze. "What the hell is going on?" At the front desk, Rob Tesh just kept typing, entering something into a system Brent and Lynn couldn't access. Kenton didn't look back. No smirk, no parting words. Just the same composed walk he'd entered with. But the silence he left behind was heavier than sirens at midnight. That evening, Brent vented to his brother over dinner, blaming connections and calling it political favoritism. Lynn, sipping beer on her porch, told her girl, and it was probably a city hall screw-up. She still figured Kenton would end up with something on his record eventually. No one walks around that confident unless they're hiding something. But as the days passed, rumors started swirling. Someone mentioned Kenton's name during briefing, and two sergeants exchanged uneasy looks. A patrol officer whispered that Kenton had once worked in Oakland, held a senior position in a government watchdog agency. Even Captain Rolst had seemed different, clipped replies, cautious words anytime Kenton's name came up. Brent began to feel uneasy. If command was shaken, something serious was at play. Lynn dismissed it. "We've got body cam footage, call logs. We followed procedure." Brent nodded, but the gesture was hollow. His gut churned. Kenton didn't fit the mold. Not the way they thought, and the quiet way he left. That wasn't guilt. They went back to work, acting like it was business as usual, but the truth was already outpacing them. By the time they realized the ground was shifting beneath them, Kenton had already risen above it, watching it all unfold. The courthouse in downtown Boise wasn't particularly grand. Just some concrete steps, glass doors, and echoes of shoes in wide hallways. Brent and Lynn arrived side by side, uniforms crisp, badges polished, expressions serious. This was familiar territory, the charge interfering with a stolen vehicle investigation. They expected Kenton to appear late, lawyer at his side, maybe try to stir up a scene, but he wasn't outside. He wasn't in the lobby or listed like a normal defendant. As they passed through security, a bailiff approached with a nod. "You two are scheduled to testify in courtroom 2C. Brent replied, "Yeah, Halcroft and Mercer. This is the Myro case, right?" The bailiff blinked. "Morrow's not the defendant." Brent frowned. "Come again." The bailiff just pointed. "You'll see." When they stepped into 2C, the atmosphere was off, not chaotic, not loud, just different. The room was packed, not with usual courtroom faces, but reporters, 2 camera crews, and even someone from city council. Brent's neck stiffened as his eyes locked on the table near the judge. There sat Kenton Morrow. No cuffs, no lawyer, just a man in a sharp dark suit, calmly flipping through a binder. A nameplate rested before him, Special Counsel for Civil Accountability, State of Idaho. Lynn leaned toward Brent. "What is this?" Brent whispered back. "I have no idea." This wasn't in the case brief. The judge called the room to order. "This session concerns procedural review regarding an arrest made on Madison Avenue," she announced. "Mr. Morrow will be serving in an advisory capacity, representing the state's Civil Accountability Office." Lynn's jaw clenched. Brent looked like someone had slapped him, and Kenton, he didn't so much as glance their way. Kenton finally got his chance to make a call. He didn't scroll through contacts or hesitate, just dialed directly. Morrow speaking. He said when the line connected, "Boys PD, Madison Avenue situation. I want full documentation this afternoon." He ended the call without emotion. No raised voice, no drama. Less than 30 seconds, but it was all that was needed. Later that same day, the station's chief quietly received a direct, formal email from the State Department of Civil Oversight. It was marked urgent. Immediate release of detainee Kenton L. Morrow. Attached were official credentials, a federal database profile, and notification of an audit under Article 14 of the State Law Enforcement Integrity Act. It didn't come from a private attorney. It came from a liaison representing the Attorney General. Within 45 minutes, Kenton was walking out of the building. Brent caught sight of him in the hallway, not restrained, not guarded, simply moving beside two suited state officials. Brent blinked, thrown off as though the lighting had shifted. "That can't be real," he muttered. Lynn narrowed her eyes. "What is happening here?" At the front desk, Rob Tesh kept typing, inputting something into a system Brent and Lynn couldn't access. Kenton never looked back. No glare, no smirk, no final remark. Just the same composed walk he came in with, but the silence in his wake was heavier than any siren blaring in the night. That evening, Brent complained to his brother over dinner, blaming powerful friends and calling it political favoritism. Lynn, relaxing on her porch with a beer, told her girlf, and it was probably just a clerical error from City Hall. She figured he'd still end up with charges. Nobody that smooths clean. He's hiding something. But as the week went on, murmurs grew louder. Someone mentioned Kenton's name during briefing, and two sergeants traded uneasy glances. A patrol officer whispered he had worked in Oakland, held a senior role in a government oversight agency. Even Captain Rolst had seemed different, responses clipped, tone guarded whenever Kenton's name was raised. That's when Brent started to feel it, unease in his gut. If leadership was rattled, something was going on. Lynn waved it off. "We've got body cam footage and the dispatch call. We followed the book." Brent agreed with a nod, but his confidence wavered. Something about Kenton didn't line up, not how they'd assumed. And the way he walked out, that wasn't the walk of someone guilty. They returned to duty as if nothing had changed, but the truth had already picked up speed. By the time they realized the foundation was shifting beneath them, Kenton had already stepped onto higher ground, watching the fallout. Boys' downtown courthouse wasn't grand, just stone steps, glass doors, and the sound of footsteps in echoing halls. Brent and Lynn arrived together, sharp in uniform, badges shining, their expressions all business. This was routine. The charge, obstruction during a stolen vehicle investigation. They expected Kenton to arrive late, flanked by an attorney, maybe make a scene, but he wasn't outside. He wasn't in the waiting area, nor listed like a typical defendant. As they passed through security, a bailiff approached them. "You're scheduled to testify in courtroom 2C, he said. Brent nodded. "Yeah, Halcroft and Mercer. This is the Myro case, right?" The bailiff blinked. "Morrow's not the defendant." Brent's brows furrowed. "What?" The bailiff simply gestured. "You'll find out." When they entered 2C, the air felt off, not chaotic, not noisy, just unfamiliar. The gallery was full. Not with usual courtroom attendees, but journalists, 2 camera crews, even a city council representative. Brent's neck stiffened as his eyes settled on the front table. There sat Kenton Morrow, uncuffed, unbothered. No defense lawyer beside him, just a man in a sleek dark suit reviewing documents from a binder. Before him, a nameplate read, "Special Counsel for Civil Accountability State of Idaho." Lynn leaned toward Brent. "What is this? A Brent whispered back, "I don't know. This wasn't in any briefing. The judge brought the courtroom to order. We are here today for a procedural review regarding an arrest made on Madison Avenue," she announced. Mr. Morrow will serve in an advisory role on behalf of the State Civil Accountability Office. Lynn's jaw tensed. Brent looked stunned, like he'd just been slapped, and Kenton, he never even looked in their direction. Kenton wasn't just any attorney mistakenly detained. He was the one person in the entire state with the access and drive to unearth their entire service history. And he didn't have to raise his voice to do it. The atmosphere inside the precinct had shifted, not busier or louder, just unnervingly tense. Brent Halcroft was the first to notice. When he stepped into the break room, the conversations abruptly stopped. It wasn't the silence of an interrupted joke, but the quiet of people afraid of saying something wrong. He retrieved his lunch from the fridge, pretending not to notice, but the unease hung thick. Lynn Mercer picked up on it later that day. Walking past a conference room, she caught a glimpse of Lieutenant Schaffer speaking in low tones with two individuals in suits. Neither wore police insignia. One carried a leather folio, the kind federal investigators typically used. She slowed, trying to catch a name. The conversation halted as soon as she came into view. That evening, Brent received a call from his cousin, a fellow officer in Twin Falls. "Hey, did you cuff a guy named Morrow last week?" he asked. Brent's stomach knotted. Why? Because his name's blowing up. State Audit Board, Civil Oversight. Everyone here is watching their backs like they're next. Brent forced a laugh. Nah, just a misunderstanding. He got mouthy. We cleared it. Even to himself, the lie rang hollow. 2 days later, they were summoned to the captain's office. It wasn't casual. Full dress, formal request, documented. Inside, the same 2 suits from the hallway sat across from Captain Rolstad's desk. "Officers Halcroft, Mercer," Rolstad said stiffly. "This is Mr. Granger and MS, OSI from Civil Accountability." "MS, OS." I barely blinked. "We're initiating an internal review regarding the incident involving Mr. Kenton Morrow." Brent kept his expression neutral. "We already addressed that. He was released. Case dismissed." Granger responded, "The review extends beyond the arrest." Lynn sat up straighter. "Beyond? We're examining your history. Complaints, traffic stops, edited reports." Rolstad slid a manila envelope across the desk. "You'll be subpoenaed for a hearing in 2 weeks." Brent opened his mouth, but no words came. Lynn managed, "Are we being charged?" "Not at this stage," Granger replied. "That's what the hearing is for." The next morning, an email landed in both their inboxes. Subject: Case Review Summary prepared by Special Counsel K. Morrow. It had attachments, many. Archived stops, unlogged body cam footage, citizen statements. Evidence they never imagined would resurface. Brent hovered over his keyboard for a long moment before opening one file. A stop from 3 years ago. Julian York. Pulled over for a broken tail light. Detained for non-compliance. Charges dropped. The footage listed as not uploaded. York's statement: he was slammed against his car after requesting a supervisor. Brent remembered it, not vividly, but enough. He shut the file, chest tight. Lynn messaged him, "They're going to make this look like a pattern." Brent replied, "It is a pattern." She paused before texting, "We followed protocol." Even she didn't sound sure. Kenton wasn't building a narrative. He was assembling facts, receipts. Brent and Lynn now saw it clearly. This wasn't damage control. It was an autopsy. The hearing didn't take place at the courthouse or precinct. It was held in a neutral municipal center off Fairview Avenue, a bland venue typically reserved for zoning disputes. But today, the tension electrified every gray chair. Brent adjusted his tie 3 times before entering. Lynn waited outside the room, flipping through a slim file she hadn't read in 20 minutes. Inside, the room brimmed with spectators, legal observers, ethics board members, reps from the Attorney General's office. No uniforms, no allies. At the head of the table sat Kenton Morrow, calm, not angry. Ready beside him, MS Osai began the session with a voice like iron. This hearing will examine procedural conduct during the arrest of Mr. Morrow and prior behavioral patterns by the involved officers. Brent and Lynn weren't facing accusations yet, but they were facing the facts. Kenton wasn't just any lawyer they happened to run into. He was the one person in the entire state who had both the clearance and the reason to dig into their full records. And he didn't need to shout to get what he wanted. The precinct didn't get noisier or busier, it just felt different, tight, heavy. Brent Halcroft was the first to pick up on it. He entered the break room, and every conversation instantly halted. Not like when someone interrupts a joke, no. This was the kind of silence where everyone is suddenly afraid to speak. He casually opened the fridge, pulled out his lunch, and tried to pretend nothing had changed. But the air felt wrong. Lynn Mercer figured it out a few hours later. She was walking past one of the conference rooms and saw Lieutenant Schaffer speaking quietly with two men in suits. Neither of them wore department badges, and one carried a leather folder, the kind federal agents always seem to have. She slowed down to try and overhear something, maybe catch a name. The moment they noticed her, the conversation stopped. Later that night, Brent received a call from his cousin, a fellow officer stationed in Twin Falls. "Hey, did you happen to cuff a guy named Morrow last week?" Brent felt his stomach twist. Why? Because his name's lighting up everywhere. State Audit Board, Oversight Office, everyone's watching reports like they're bracing for an audit. Brent chuckled, but it didn't sound natural. Nah, no big deal. Just a mix-up. Guy got mouthy. We handled it. Even to him, the lie was starting to feel hollow. 2 days later, the captain summoned them. This wasn't a casual drop-by request, it was formal, full dress, paper trail. When they entered Captain Ralstad's office, the same two suited figures were already seated. Officers Halcroft, Mercer, Ralstad began sharply. "This is Mr. Granger and MS Osai from the Office of Civil Accountability." MS Os, I didn't offer a smile, barely blinked. "We're initiating an internal investigation concerning the events of last Thursday morning involving Mr. Kenton Morrow." Brent's expression froze. "We've already spoken to him. He was released. Case dismissed. Nothing further occurred." Granger stepped in. "The investigation isn't limited to the arrest." Lynn sat straighter. "I'm sorry, what exactly is being looked at? Your records, complaints, arrest logs, reports, including those revised after submission." Captain Ralstad shifted, then slid a manila folder across the table. "You'll each be subpoenaed to attend a review hearing in 2 weeks." Brent opened his mouth, but couldn't speak. Lynn swallowed hard. "Are we under investigation?" "Not yet." Granger said simply, "That's what the hearing will determine." The following morning, both Brent and Lynn received identical emails. Subject: Case Review Summary prepared by Special Counsel K. Morrow attached were files, lots of them. Old traffic stops, timestamps from body cameras, witness statements. All the threads they never expected someone to tie together. Brent stared at his screen, frozen for nearly a minute before he clicked anything. He opened one, a stop from 3 years back. A man named Julian York pulled over for a busted tail light. Detained for noncompliance. Charges later dropped. Body cam footage, listed as never uploaded. York's statement claimed he'd been slammed against his vehicle after asking for a supervisor. Brent remembered it not fully, but enough. He shut the file, feeling the weight in his chest grow. A message popped up from Lynn. "Brent, they're going to make this look like a pattern." He replied, "Lynn, it is a pattern." She didn't answer right away. Then we followed procedure, but even she didn't sound sure anymore, because Kenton wasn't just bringing a complaint, he had proof. and Brent and Lynn were starting to realize this wasn't damage control. It was dissection. The hearing didn't take place at their precinct or even the courthouse. It was held at a quiet municipal building on Fairview Avenue, the type usually reserved for zoning appeals or forgotten local business. But on this day, the tension inside the dull, gray conference room was electric. Brent adjusted his tie 3 times before entering. Lynn sat outside, pretending to read the contents of a slim folder she hadn't glanced at in 20 minutes. They weren't alone. Around the long table were over a dozen people, legal observers, someone from the city's ethics board, 2 officials from the state attorney's office. No uniforms, no allies. At the head sat Kenton Morrow. He didn't look mad. That might have been easier. He looked ready, and beside him sat MS Asai, who opened the session in a voice as flat as stone. "This is a formal inquiry under Article 14. Officers Halcroft and Mercer are present. The matter under review involves claims of abusing discretionary powers and consistently misapplying procedural stops." Turning toward Kenton, the chairwoman spoke. "Special Counsel Morrow, you may proceed." Kenton didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. Calmly, he opened a folder. "This won't be about isolated claims," he began. "This will focus on repeated behavior." He laid the first document on the table. Case 1, Julian York, pulled over for a broken tail light. Detained for more than 45 minutes. No charges filed. No body camera footage attached to the report. Lynn cleared her throat. That was 3 years ago. Kenton didn't even glance up. Case 2, Alan Rivers, fitted the vague description of a robbery suspect. Same station, identical language in the report. Again, detained without legal cause, no charges pressed. He slid the next sheet into view. Case 3, same officers, same terminology, matched description, suspicious conduct, uncooperative tone. Brent leaned in. "We respond to the information we're given. We don't create the descriptions. But you choose how long to hold someone," Kenton countered. "You decide whether to verify ID or question first. You decide your tone, your words, and how many times a person with no record walks away hurt and never hears sorry." He pulled out a printed street map, dotted with red markers. "These represent every stop the 2 of you made over 5 years. The pins weren't random. They gathered in tight clusters across a handful of neighborhoods. We compared your stops to 3 other patrol teams," Kenton said. "You make 42% more stops of those. 80% involve individuals from the same demographic. 90% result in no charges. MS Os, I spoke, her voice quiet but pointed. That's not policing, that's targeting." Lynn's tone rose. "So we're being scrutinized for doing our jobs, responding to dispatches, following the rules. You're not being tried." Kenton replied evenly, "You're being reviewed. A review triggered because this time you stopped the wrong person. Not someone voiceless. Not someone invisible. Me." He paused, letting the statement breathe. "I wasn't anybody special that morning. I wasn't wearing a badge. I was a man standing outside a bakery. That was all it took." Brent exhaled sharply. "We were answering a call. We didn't single you out." "You didn't have to," Kenton replied. "The system you work within does that for you." He looked around the table, then back at the 2 officers. "You can't repair what you refuse to acknowledge." No one spoke. The silence didn't feel triumphant, it felt clinical. This wasn't about revenge. This was about laying things bare. Every shortcut, every fast, tracked report, every eye roll after a citizen's complaint, it all resurfaced. Because when you make the same decision again and again, it stops being an error. It becomes identity. By day 2, Brent Halcroft was unraveling. He arrived looking worn, jaw tight, gaze distant, back stiff. He barely spoke to Lynn, barely glanced her way. She seemed composed, or at least tried to appear that way. She wore her usual air of defiance, but her eyes gave her away. She was scanning, tracking, reading the room too carefully. Kenton Morrow didn't bring fury or theatrics. He brought testimony. One by one, witnesses stepped in. Julian York, from the traffic stop, shared his story how asking for a supervisor ended with a sprained wrist, how his complaint was filed and forgotten, how no one followed up. Then Alan Rivers, mistaken for a thief while walking home with groceries, tackled in front of his child. She didn't speak for days afterward. Brent shifted uncomfortably as that story unfolded. Others followed. Not everyone came, but those who didn't shout or accuse. They just described what had happened. Which made it harder. Brent and Lynn couldn't discredit them. The stories were simple, human, undeniable. Lynn folded her arms. We've seen the worst of humanity. We can't afford hesitation when the pieces line up. Kenton studied her like an engineer evaluating stress points. Maybe the issue, he said after a beat, is what you believe lines up. Brent's voice broke slightly. You don't know what it's like out there. People lie, threaten you, run. That changes how you interpret things. Kenton gave a small nod. I'm not saying your job is easy, he said, but when the same faces are always paying for everyone else's crimes, it stops being about threat. It starts becoming about ease, comfort. Lynn scoffed. You mean the comfort of assumed conclusions, the luxury of never being the one face, down on the pavement. Brent's posture dipped, almost imperceptibly. Then MS Asai opened another file. 3 reports from the last 2 years indicate possible manipulation of body camera submissions, she said. One video file was marked as corrupted. Another was never turned in. Brent raised his gaze slowly, the movement heavy. That's a technical issue. That's not on us. Kenton didn't flinch. It wasn't your fault the first time, or maybe even the second. But now we're talking about the 4th. For the first time, Lynn didn't offer a comeback. The accumulated data, the footage, the repeat patterns was pressing down, heavier than either expected. They'd always felt insulated, shielded, but now that barrier was showing its fractures. And Kenton wasn't trying to break it, just illuminating where it was already broken. One of the board members, a former officer herself, leaned forward. Do either of you recognize that your actions may have caused harm? Lynn stared at her, then looked down at the table. Finally, she said, We followed what we were taught. The words lingered unchallenged. Kenton spoke softly. Then maybe it's time we teach something else. Because once you see the cracks, you can't pretend the wall still stands. The final hearing day didn't begin with drama. No loud voices, no ceremonial strikes of a gavel. Just the rustle of documents and the quiet weight of people aware this was the end, and that not everyone would leave unchanged. Brent and Lynn sat together, still in uniform, but altered. Brent no longer defended anything. He remained silent. Lynn had her arms locked across her chest, face forward, lips sealed, no longer defiant, only rigid. Kenton Morrow stood and walked to the center. Alone, no legal team, no show, just him, carrying a folder, corners soft from use. He set it down gently. I've said what needed saying. He began. You've listened to the impacted individuals. You've seen the numbers, the report language, the recovered footage. You've noticed how the same terms appear, the same approaches. The same kinds of people stopped, questioned, cuffed, and then let go quietly without charge. He looked at Brent. I don't think either of you joined the force with harmful intent, but at some point, you stopped checking yourselves. You stopped seeing individuals and started identifying profiles. No one interrupted. I'm not here to destroy your careers, Kenton continued. That's not what justice looks like. I'm here because the system won't change unless we stop covering for practices that clearly don't work. He turned to the panel. My recommendation, he stated plainly, is that Officers Halcroft and Mercer be permanently reassigned from fieldwork. They should undergo retraining, psychological evaluation, and a full audit of their department. I'm also requesting that the incidents flagged during this hearing be officially reopened. Brent didn't react. He expected this. Lynn muttered under her breath, "It was just the job." "No," Kenton answered, facing her. "It was a responsibility." And when that's forgotten, people get hurt. 35 minutes later, the board returned with its decision. Brent Halcroft, suspended from field duty, badge removed, pending reassessment. Lynn Mercer, same result, neither argued, neither protested, no slammed doors, no speeches, just two officers who had long believed their roles came without consequence. Kenton quietly gathered his documents. On the way out, he paused near Brent. Brent looked up. "Just for a second. I didn't think it would end like this," he said. "It didn't have to," Kenton replied, "but that choice wasn't mine." He walked away, saying nothing more. That evening, Brent emptied his locker alone. Lynn never showed. Word was, she'd taken personal leave. No one contacted them. The same colleagues who once raised glasses at banquets and retirements were suddenly unavailable. The precinct had already begun to glance. Over its shoulder, a new poster was pinned near the squad room. "Civil Accountability Hotline Confidential." Some rookies stared at it longer than they needed to. As for Kenton, he flew to Coeur d'Alene the next morning. Another town, another station, another quiet investigation. That was his work. Not for applause, but for structure, for truth, for steady repair. He didn't need recognition. He just needed the wall to stop pretending it wasn't broken. Because if no one monitors the watchers, the loop never ends. Now, finally, someone was. 2 months later, Boys was still finding its footing. The media had mostly moved on no sweeping protests, no trending hashtags, but something in the air had shifted, and those who paid close attention could feel it. Kenton Myro didn't remain in town. That was never the plan. His work required movement, city after city, case after case, never lingering long enough to become part of the narrative. He wasn't chasing applause or admiration. He simply believed that accountability should apply to everyone, not just the powerless. But his absence didn't erase what he'd left behind. The Boys Precinct's training manual saw revisions, not sweeping changes, but meaningful ones. Officers were now expected to analyze real, life footage, not rehearsed simulations of stops gone wrong. Kenton's case became one of the examples. A new question emerged during recruit orientation. Have you ever made a mistake and learned from it? It wasn't meant to shame. It was a test to see if someone could own their actions before being trusted with a badge. Brent Halcroft took a position with the city's vehicle impound department. Desk work. No weapons. Quiet. He never brought up the review board or claimed to be treated unfairly. Some said he carried bitterness. Others believed he'd finally started to listen. Lynn Mercer didn't return. Rumors placed her back in Wyoming, living closer to family. She deleted her social media, declined every interview request. She didn't contest the board's findings, but she never voiced acceptance either, not publicly. As for those who had been stopped, cuffed, and humiliated without cause, some received apologies. Not all, but some. Julian York got a handwritten note from the mayor's office. Eileen Rivers received a call from the city attorney asking if he'd consider mediation. Nothing loud, no headlines, no major settlements, just small, quiet signals that something had struck a nerve. That was the part many people overlooked. Justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it shows up in the form of a listener, someone in authority finally being questioned, and maybe next time, someone will hesitate before treating a man in a navy coat like a criminal instead of a person. Because that morning outside the bakery could have happened to anyone, but it happened to Kenton Myro, a man who had spent his life watching others be ignored. And when it became his turn, he didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply held up a mirror, and for once they were forced to look into it. The takeaway was never that Brent and Lynn were monsters, not even anomalies. The real lesson was this: how quickly a person can stop seeing others as human and how dangerous. That becomes when that mindset wears a badge. And maybe, just maybe, someone in that station, some new recruit with stiff boots and a spotless badge, would remember all of this the next time a vague call came in. Maybe they'd pause. Maybe they'd ask one more question. Maybe they'd verify an ID before reaching for cuffs. And maybe that would be enough to change one life. Maybe more. Because change doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks quietly out of a hearing room with a worn folder full of names and works to ensure history doesn't repeat. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, if you believe the truth should challenge us to grow, subscribe to this channel. Each story brings us closer to understanding. Let's not turn away when it counts.